I heard someone say that it is impossible to fix an old story, one that you have had in your drawer for several years, that it is not worth putting your hand to a story that you conceived years ago. This video is here to remind you that only a Sith lives by absolutes, and to never trust anyone who tells you that something is impossible, at least in the creative realm. It's not easy, there are some creative traps, but it is not impossible. While I'm in the process of translating the books I have already published, the 6 you see behind me, of which Odyssey to Trappist 1 will be released on Amazon in ebook and paperback on June 11th, this is the Italian version, I am also reviewing a fantasy saga that has been dormant for several years. I have gained quite a bit of experience over the last 4 years publishing these 6 books, and decided it was time to finish this story and set it on its way to future publication. However, upon rereading the material, which I thought it was fairly final, I found that it needed a complete rewrite. Since it turned out to be a much longer journey than I have planned, I decided to share some of the stages with you. I have never done such a thing, I'm one of those writers who keeps the project he's working secret and only talks about them after published. However, the Salinger-esque hermit writer persona is no longer as effective in a world dominated by social media, and by now I have gotten used to the idea of sharing this story with you, and of course I'm not gonna spoil anything about the plot other than the more general backover stuff, and I decided to push myself out of my comfort zone and see what happens. Which brings us to today's topic: how to edit an old story. I decided to make this video for a specific reason. I heard someone say that it is impossible to fix an old story, one that you have had in your drawer for several years, that it is not worth putting your hand to a story that you conceived years ago. This video is here to remind you that only a Sith lives by absolutes, and to never trust anyone who tells you that something is impossible, at least in the creative realm. It's not easy, there are some creative traps, but it is not impossible. The main point of this argument is that a story conceived, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, has been outlined and written with your skill at the time. In the meantime, if you have practiced, you have written a lot, you have studied storytelling, narratology, you will certainly know how to improve it, but you will run the risk to getting entangled in the old mental patterns and the old story structure. In short, the objection is, there is no point in wasting time fixing an old story, because it will never come out as well as outlining a new one. In a new story you can bring all your new skills into play, without the prejudice and pattern you develop as a budding writer. And it's true that when you go back to revise a story that's been in the drawer for a long time, you run the risk of getting too attached to the structure you build up, when you didn't know how to outline a story, when you hadn't thought about the 3-act structure, when you hadn't planned character arcs for each character, and you run the risk of not being able to make the necessary changes. Partially because we like the story and we don't want to twist it, partially because in our minds things are the way they are, and we don't even question some characters or certain plot points or the structure of the story itself. Does that mean it's impossible? No, of course not. It means that it is a complex operation, both technically and emotionally, but it is not impossible. These absolutist arguments triggers me so much. This is why I'm making this video, because a story can sit in a drawer for years for thousands of reasons. Maybe you didn't have the skills to handle it at the time. Maybe you lacked some ideas and you got stuck. Maybe life just got in the way and we didn't have the time or the mental serenity to continue working on it. Maybe some parts of the story are actually very good. Maybe we still adore some of the characters we characterized. Maybe we were into world building and we had created an interesting world. Maybe the idea, the theme, is something we just can't get out of our heads, and it's the outline we created around it that doesn't work, but the idea is fine. The fact that someone can abandon an old project, maybe a good one, just because the egomaniac on duty told them it was impossible to give it a new life, really pissed me off. I'm not saying that you should try to get back from the dead every carcass of a novel. I have myself thrown a lot of stories in the trash, and never even occurred to my mind to try to revitalize some of them. They're fine where they are. All I'm saying is you have to judge on a case-by-case basis. So, what do you do in such cases? There are two major problems, one technical and the other one emotional, namely an old structure that is not functional enough and the love that we feel for that story. What I suggest is that you harden your heart and do the deconstruction.
Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
Deconstruct the work, separate its various elements, sort them into categories so you can easily visualize them, setting, plot, characters, write them down on a piece of paper, on a post-it notes, in a Word file, whatever works best for you. The set of elements you end up will depend greatly on the story you're analyzing. Then start asking yourself questions to identify the things you like and wanna keep, and the things you don't like and you should delete. And I mean, really start from the basics. Do you want to tell the story in first person or third person? Maybe you never even thought about changing perspectives, changing protagonists, changing narrators, adding, removing, or changing POV of characters, reducing them to a single POV if you have many, or going to a multi-POV if you have only one. Choosing which characters to tell the story through is crucial. Does everything revolves around them, or are there parts that some character doesn't see? If you want to tell those as well, you have to use an omniscient narrator with all the problems that it brings, or you have to include a point of view character who is present while those story events take place. You can also decide to eliminate a point of view character to keep his or her action mysterious. It all depends on how you want to tell your story. The possibilities are endless. Ask yourself which characters have the most interesting stories, which characters suffer the most through the story. Usually those are the characters you want to use as a POV. You can also decide to give more or less equal space to different POV characters. Maybe some are more important than others. Maybe one of them is the main character. Maybe all of them are. For example, I had 4 point of view characters, one of which was the actual protagonist of the story. The focus was divided, we can say 20-20-20-40. So 3 were on the same level, while 1 stood above the others. However, I decided to shift the focus from that character to the overall situation, the ongoing war, and makes it a choral story, with each character sharing the space equally. I decided to double the point of view, bringing them from 4 up to 8 to tell more stuff about the faction involved in the war, to go into more details in the dynamic of the conflict, and I cut out several secondary characters who came from outside, from distant kingdoms and countries, and who were not personally involved in the events, who only risked scattering the focus of the story and had no real reason to be there. This is another thing you can ask yourself about your cast. Are they because it makes sense that for them to be there, or did you just include them because you like them, but on a closer inspection they seem like people who just happen to pass by? Personally, when I decided to give the saga a definite identity of this war, I preferred to cut out some of the secondary characters who are there because I liked them, but just seemed to be loose cannons who were there as the events unfold and had no real reason to get involved. Regarding the setting, it depends a lot on the world building you had done and how important it is in your story, but try to look at what you have and ask yourself if there are parts you don't need that you can ignore to make the story easier to understand. Everybody knows that info dump is a big problem for fantasy and science fiction. Maybe on the other hand, there are other aspects of your world building that can inspire new ideas you haven't explored. Maybe you realize that you have the potential to expand your world and bring into your story new places, new characters, new themes that will complement and enrich the ones you already have. In my case, the working title of the story is The War of Aragard. You can already imagine that it is a context of a war that is in the background of the events of the 8 main characters. But why did I add 4 characters to the 4 already present? Well, in the original, the story mainly saw Aragard reacting to an invasion by Utgard, which represent the remains of a great empire trying to regain its former glory. When I revised the project, I realized that it was a bit naive in its view of the conflict and decided to give it a more mature slant. As should clear by everyone given the time we're living in, there is no war without conflicting positions on both sides, and there is no dictator who comes to power without a resistance that opposes him, both before and after. And that resistance tends to oppose him in a political way before he takes power, and even in a terroristic way afterwards, moving in the realms of grey morality. That's why I need characters in Utgard that would allow me to show this power struggle within a nation when one side tries to suffocate the other, to make it more complex and realistic. Then, of course, you have to think about the story itself, what you actually want to happen. And if you have changed your protagonist, your point of view characters, the secondary characters and the part of your setting you want to go to, it's pretty much inevitable that the story will be disrupted as well. I found it useful to make a chart of all the phases of the triact structure, or whatever scheme you prefer, and start placing the plot staples, the important events that define your story, the things you certainly want to happen, and fill the other phases accordingly. At the same time, I made an outline of each character's arc, whether it's positive, flat or negative, the lie he believes, the truth he has to accept, his desires, fears, and what kind of ending you want to reserve for him. If you want a more in-depth look in the character arc stuff, I made a whole playlist on my Italian channel. Let me know if you want me to translate it and film another playlist to post on this channel. After you have created each character's arc chart and the 3-act structure chart, try placing each interesting turn in your character's arc on the 3-act structure to visualize each character's journey and the emotional tension that develops in each storyline. These are not independent processes, of course, they naturally interact one with the other, so don't force yourself to finish one thing before starting the other, because nothing is final until the whole is complete. Expect a beautiful creative chaos, a web of elements coming together in the construction of the story. And if at some point the process proves too complex to handle, if you are crazy like me and end up with 8 POV characters and probably 5 books I still have to understand that, you can always, once you reach a fairly stable midpoint, take a break. Clear your head, let the project rest for a while and come back later. It's actually what I'm doing right now. I started to work on it, I reached a stable midpoint, and I decided to leave it to rest a few weeks while I'm doing other stuff, like filming videos for the channel and working at plots for other books. And that's all, folks. Sure, editing an old story is not easy, and there are some pitfalls you are likely to fall into, but it's certainly not impossible. And if one of the stories you have in your drawer really inspires you, I believe it is possible to deconstruct and reconstruct the story to cleanse it from the mistakes of youth and reforge it stronger than ever. If you want to learn more about the story I write, subscribe to the channel and follow me on my socials. I will probably post vlogs on Patreon in the future to bring you into the creative process of this book, and maybe also for the sequels of the books I'm writing. I remind you that Odyssey to Trappist 1 is going to be published June 11th, so don't miss it. It is a science fiction novella, and I love it. It is the first novella I ever written, and you can actually pre-order it right now on Amazon, and I look forward to share it with you because I am really proud of it and I really hope you like. If you want to learn more about the book, there are links in the description where you can read about the plot, the characters, and I think it's all for now. I wish you good reading and good writing. Bye!